All right, the Supreme Court ruling is in on health care. Now, will it influence the presidential elections? We're here with University of Hartford Associate Political Science Professor Bilal Sekou. Welcome, a regular contributor. Good to see you.
Thanks a lot.
So we thought we had you in the last segment. So this was a big deal. This was a very important ruling. So the issue now is politically, how does it help Obama? How does it hurt the president?
Right. Well, I mean, the big picture of this, of course, is that this is his legacy, right? I mean, this is the most significant thing he did in the first term, and I think it will, give him his place in history. The question of whether it helps or hurts him going into the, the election, I think, is a really interesting question. On the one hand, I mean, this will really be about jobs in the economy. I think that's really the central question. We're still in a recession. People are worried about jobs, the nature of the economy, and so I think that's front and center. Now, on the other hand, for Republicans, though, I think in terms of motivating or galvanizing their base, this ruling, I think, gives them the kind of tool they need to be able to raise money. I mean, there are at least three things about this, ruling that I think people don't like. One is the notion that this is a tax. And, Republicans immediately, the day of the decision, they went on the offense talking about this as a tax.
Not only a tax, the biggest tax in the history of the world, they say, right?
Exactly. They were throwing numbers out there, like 500 billion. I mean, it was just a huge amount of money. I think the second thing people are, also sort of moved by this is the question of personal freedom. The idea that if you select not to pick up health care, you should be able to do that. So, Michelle Bachmann talked about this as an affront to people's personal liberties, right? And so that's the second thing. And I think the third thing, the third leg of this is what Mitt Romney talked about, is that this may be constitutional, but it's bad public policy. So I think those are the three things the Republicans are going to talk about quite a bit over the next few months to sort of motivate their base to go after Obama. But on the side of the Democrats, I mean, as your previous guest talked about, Obama's got to talk about the fact that this is good health care for the country, and this is really for the people. I heard someone the other day at a press conference describe this not as Obamacare, but Obama cares. And I think that's what the president really has to talk about.
Yeah, marketing. Now, would it have been so bad if the Supreme Court overturned this thing that would have given him the chance to say, you know what, it was actually a flawed, it wasn't the bill that he wanted, it was a flawed bill, so flawed that most folks don't understand what's going on with it. Would it have been the worst thing in the world for him to say, you know what, I promised a health care bill, I got it passed, it didn't pass muster with the Supreme Court, but now we'll have a chance to fix it, we'll add the public health option, we'll make it better, we'll find a way to push it through. Would that have been a bad thing, or would it have been too time-consuming to regroup?
I think from a political standpoint, I just can't see an upside to this. I mean, if he had lost this bill, that would have given Republicans a great deal of ammunition to go after him about, here's a centerpiece piece of legislation. It's a failure. The Supreme Court has rejected it.
But how would he have spun it? How would he have spun it, though? Because he was prepared for that. So what was going to be the spin? If indeed they turned it down, what do you surmise the Obama spin would have been on this had they turned this down? Because they had something coming. So what was there going to be there?
Well, clearly they were preparing themselves for it. But I think, the president would have, really talked about how this is just something that he was really trying to do for the country, that, a court, perhaps even going after the court the way he did in Citizens United, where he really directly talks about the court being politicized, for example, and trying to spin it in that way to say this really isn't a decision about policy, it's more about politics. And then we have a court in which at least 4 justices are firmly in the conservative camp. Kennedy, would probably have been the swing vote to have overturned it, but I think he would have talked about the politics of this and not allowed it to simply be a rejection of the policy.
But it's a bullet he didn't have to use, was the bottom line, right? So now the issue now with health care, you have Romney, was problematic now for the Republicans, so that Romney had his own health care bill in Massachusetts. One of the president says he modeled this health care bill after. So how does he backpedal? He's trying to say, well, hang on a minute, there's some caveats here, but Obama's saying I modeled my bill after Romney's.
In this case, I think what Romney talks about is the policy side. I think Romney's strongest argument he can make is that this is bad public policy. But even then, he's walking on I think he's treading on difficult water, because he promoted a policy quite similar to this in Massachusetts. I think the question, a few days ago, even someone from his staff said, this was a penalty. And they're trying to distance themselves away from the notion of it being a tax. And I think, certainly for others in the Republican Party, they're going to use the tax angle. But I think for Mitt Romney, it's difficult because it does essentially what his plan did in Massachusetts.
Very problematic. Why can't the president say, listen, whether people are opposed for it, this is what the man ran on, right? So why can't he just say, listen, I ran on the health care issue, understanding it was controversial, never been done. It got passed. I understand it's going to be controversy, but I stand by it. Why should he have to backpedal? Why did he simply just stand firm and say, this is what I ran on? I understood it was controversial, but I made this promise. I got it. Let's move on. What's so wrong with just saying, this is what I ran on, folks? Remember, it's why you voted me in, for the most part.
In terms of the president.
Right.
In terms of his, well, I think the president will use this. I mean, he will use this issue. This is a win for him. It's a big win for him. I mean, it's a big deal. You know, not quite the way Biden described it, but a big deal. And so from that standpoint, the president runs on this. But again, I think, you know, come November, the real issue that he's got to deal with, and I think his presidency will really hinge upon, is the question of what's the economy like in 4 months.
How about these gas prices? Now, you can't blame the president for the increase, but you know he's going to take credit for the decrease. These things, the gas is going down and down, and that's got to be a mitigating factor. When people go to vote, the gas prices are going down to $3.40 now, or whatever it is. That's got to be a big deal.
I mean, you know, one of the biggest myths I think most of us hold about the presidency is that the president has a lot of control over the economy. The reality is the president has very little control.
But psychologically, right?
But I mean, there are things the president can do, but I think, you know, the perception is that, you know, the president has more control than the president actually has. But what the president has to deal with, though, is if it's a bad economy, he will get the blame.
Right. And right now, the economy is still teetering. Those swing states are still critical in 30 seconds. You have Virginia, right? Carolina, Indiana, Pennsylvania. It's, at the end of the day, it's going to come down to what happens in those swing states. We're going to have you back on because this is not going anywhere, and we have about 15 seconds to go. But we'll talk next about the swing states. We'll get your title right next to how about that? All right. Associate Professor Bilal Sekou, folks. Thanks to all our guests. Nwanda Olewola. I messed that name up too. Frances Padilla, we'll come back to her. And don't forget to catch our show 24/7, ctnow.com/Stan. Friend us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter for the good folks here at Fox, Connecticut. I'm Stan Simpson, Tim Lammers, and the morning show is next.